Yeah, we've been studying the lives of the kings of the divided kingdom of Israel and Judah, and we have seen that since the time of Solomon, it's mostly been a history of decay. The overall trend has been decline, although there were high moments in between. There were some good kings who did many wonderful things, and God blessed them. So there were high moments, but overall the trend has been one of decline. And Solomon ended his reign somewhere in the 930 or 900, yeah, around 930 BC. So around 200 years later, that's 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel ceased to exist. That is, they went into captivity. The Assyrian king, the Assyrian empire came, and the king came and he besieged the city and deported the inhabitants. And then after that, the southern kingdom of Judah, made up of two tribes of Judah and Benjamin, they continued for some time. And in the last few weeks, we have seen how in this period, Judah was benefited by the presence of good kings like Hezekiah and Josiah. But we also saw that Hezekiah's son Manasseh was very wicked. He led the people into a lot of wickedness, and that was like the point of no return. The line was crossed where God said that he is going to destroy Judah and Jerusalem. And after Josiah, we saw that his sons were not good. There was Jehoahaz and Jehoiakim, whom we studied about last time. There was Jehoiachin, that is the son of Jehoiakim. He ruled only for 3 months and 10 days, and he was also taken into captivity. Last time, towards the end, we meditated on this age of Jehoiachin. Was it 8 years or 18 years? And that behind that numerical problem was this burden that the grandfather Josiah had, that none of his sons were good, and he was placing his hopes on his grandson. But Nebuchadnezzar removed his grandson also from being king. So Jehoiakim was killed. Jehoiachin was taken as a prisoner to Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar appointed a new king whose name was Zedekiah. That's another son of Josiah. The year is 597 BC. 597 BC, and the last king of the house of David now comes to the throne. Shall we read our first verse, 2 Kings? 2 Kings chapter 24 and verse 17. 2 Kings chapter 24 and verse 17. Angelica.
He made Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, king in place, and changed his name to Zedekiah.
Yes. So Mattaniah means the gift of Jehovah. Now, this fellow is the uncle of Jehoiachin. That's the young king that went into captivity last time. So he is the another son of Josiah. So his name means the gift of Jehovah. The gift of Jehovah. That from this we learn Josiah's thoughts about the children that he had. However, Nebuchadnezzar changed his name to Zedekiah. And Zedekiah means Jehovah is righteous. Now, earlier last time, we saw that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, was angry with Jehoiakim because he had turned towards Egypt. He had broken his treaty with the king of Babylon, and he had looked for assistance to Egypt, and he had stopped paying tribute. So Nebuchadnezzar was very angry with Jehoiakim, and that's why he came and attacked him and had him killed. And now he had removed Jehoiachin, the young king, because he couldn't trust him. And now he has put the young king's uncle, Zedekiah, in place. And this man, Zedekiah, is not normally supposed to be destined for the throne because he is not the eldest son. He is the brother of the king Jehoiakim. So Nebuchadnezzar thought that since I'm doing a favor on this fellow, I'm making him king, although he was not of that kingly line, at least he will be grateful to me. And therefore, he will listen to me. He'll be loyal and subservient to me. And so Nebuchadnezzar made him promise, I'm not going to have anything to do with Egypt. I'm going to be loyal to Babylon. And he has changed his name to Zedekiah, which means that Jehovah is righteous. That means the king of Babylon is trying to tell him that, look, your God is a righteous God. He will hold you accountable. So you should be loyal to me. You're promising, you're making a covenant that you're going to be loyal to me. So you should honor that word, because your God, Jehovah, is a righteous man, is a righteous God. By the way, by now, Daniel has already interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's first dream. So Nebuchadnezzar is familiar with the God of Israel. And even if he is not a full believer in the God of Israel, he does have a regard for the God whom Daniel worships, the God of Israel. And he knows his name. And so he has changed Mattaniah's name to Zedekiah. That is, Jehovah is righteous, and therefore you should keep your word, the covenant that I'm making with you. No looking to Egypt for help. You are going to be loyal and subservient to me. So that's how Zedekiah came to the throne. Now, what kind of person was Zedekiah? We will see in bits and pieces as we go further. He was not a good king. He was evil. At the same time, he was not like Manasseh or Ahaz. If you remember, Manasseh, Ahaz, Ahab, these people were devoted to idolatry. There is nothing written in the Bible which says that Zedekiah was devoted to idolatry. So in that sense, he was not evil. But we get some glimpses into his character from the things that were going on in his kingdom. Let us turn for a moment to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 14. Shall we read Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 14? This is one of the visions that God gave Ezekiel. Ezekiel 8, 14.
Then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw a woman sitting there, mourning the god Tammuz.
Yeah. So this is part of a vision that God gave Ezekiel as to what was going on inside the temple. So there are many scenes here. God shows Ezekiel different rooms in the temple and different things are happening. So here in verse 14, there are some women who are mourning for Tammuz. Now, Tammuz was a Babylonian god, and he was associated with fertility and good crops, and he was also associated with spring and summer. So these people, it was the month of October, and October is the time when winter starts. So these women were mourning for Tammuz because it was felt that, you know, when winter comes, Tammuz dies, and then when spring comes, then Tammuz again gets resurrected. So when Tammuz dies, the women are weeping for him. So here you can see there is outright paganism that is going on. In verse 16, you see there are some men who are worshipping the sun. And like that, there are so many such scenes here. So God shows Ezekiel all the abominations that are going on. Now, this is happening right under Zedekiah's nose. So perhaps he was not an active believer or participant in this idolatry, but he is tolerating and allowing all these things to flourish when he is the king. He's supposed to be the leader. So even if he is not approving of these things, he is allowing these things to tolerate this, to go on despite being the leader. So that tells us something about Zedekiah, isn't it? He is a spineless leader, a leader who did not care for God and his righteousness. Not an active believer in pagan gods, but at the same time, somebody who did not care for God and his righteousness. Now, remember, Zedekiah's father's name was Josiah. And remember how Josiah died? He was a good king. He died when he went out to interfere in somebody else's quarrel. There was a king of Egypt called Necho II, and he came out on his campaign. Josiah interfered with him and got killed in the battle. So that was Necho. Now, Necho had a son who is not mentioned in the Bible, but in history, he is called Psamtik II. Now, in Zedekiah's 6th year, Psamtik came out of Egypt and he visited Judah He visited Tyre, Sidon, and Philistia. So this is not mentioned in the Bible, but it's known from secular history. So, for example, there's this book called the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt. So this book takes the original sources and documents this incident. This king, the son of the person who killed Josiah, he came out of Egypt and he did a little bit of campaign. It was not a war campaign, but he just made some friendly visits to all these places near Judah. His aim, it was a diplomatic campaign. What was his aim? His aim was to get these people to rebel against Nebuchadnezzar, against the Babylonians. And guess what? Zedekiah fell for the bait. He listened to this Egyptian pharaoh and he decided that, okay, I'm not going to pay any more tribute to the Babylonians. I'm not going to be subservient to them. I will now make an alliance with Egypt. In other words, he broke that covenant. For us, spiritually speaking today, Egypt is like a symbol of the world. And as believers, we have to be careful with what all association we have in the world. We are in the world, so we cannot avoid dealing with the world, but we have to avoid partnerships or ventures or unequal yokes with the world. And Zedekiah got himself under the Egyptian yoke. Let us read Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 27.
Which verse?
Yeah, chapter 27, verse 2 and 3.
This is what the Lord said to me: make a yoke out of straps and crossbars and put it on your neck. Then send word to the kings of Edom, Moab, Ammon, Tyre, and Sidon through the envoys who have come to Jerusalem, to Zedekiah, king of Judah.
Look at this. Everybody is showing up at Zedekiah's place. They are all getting together. What is the agenda? The agenda is rebellion against Babylon. So the king of Egypt has visited all these people, or at least some of them. They have decided to rebel against Babylon, and the person who is coordinating everything is none other than our Zedekiah. He was the ringleader. He became the ringleader of rebellion against Babylon. Let us read verse 4 and 5.
Give them a message for their masters and say, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel says. Tell this to your masters. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anyone I please.
Yes, yes. Now, Israel was supposed to be a witness to the nation. And instead, they rebelled against God and they were falling under God's judgment. And part of that whole process was that the neighboring kings had sent messengers to the king of Judah. But now God uses Jeremiah and God uses this occasion to do what Israel had failed to do. To do what Israel had failed to do. And what is that? To proclaim God's greatness to the nation. God is telling through Jeremiah and through the messengers that have come from the neighboring kingdoms, God is telling them that I am the true God. I am the one who has made heaven and earth. And I am the one who gives kingdoms to people. Your national deities are not the true God. I, the God of Israel, I am the God who made heaven and the earth. And then in verse 6, he says, now I have given all these kingdoms to the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. And then in verse 7 and 8, he says, whichever nation refuses to serve Babylon is going to be destroyed. So all these people have come to Jerusalem to organize rebellion against Babylon. But at that time, God is telling Jeremiah to tell all these people, look, it's not going to work. The God of heaven has given the whole land to the king of Babylon. So your rebellion is not going to work. You can imagine how these Jewish officials must have felt when all these ambassadors have come and their own prophet is telling them, an opposite message. Jeremiah would have become very unpopular with this kind of message. So God is telling the people in verse 8, he says, the only way is to survive is to pay tribute to Babylon. If you rebel against Babylon, then you are going to be destroyed. And we are not going to digress so much into Jeremiah, but God is telling the nations, not just Israel, but the nations around, that I'm going to judge you for the wickedness that is there in you. And the judgment is this, that Babylon is going to dominate over you, not just for Judah, but even for the surrounding nations. Let's read one verse of Jeremiah's message to the nations. Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 11. Jeremiah chapter 10 and verse 11.
Tell them this, these gods who did not make the heavens and the earth will perish from the earth and from under the heavens.
Yeah, this was a message that Jeremiah gave to the nation. Now, there is something special in this verse, and that is, it is the only verse in the whole book which is written in the Aramaic language. The Aramaic language was spoken by the Babylonians, and it had become now popular among the entire region. Whereas the rest of Jeremiah is written in the Hebrew language. So there is one verse or one sentence written in Aramaic, and it is proclaiming to all the countries around that your gods are going to perish off the earth. They are not true gods. They are not the true God. They are false gods, and they are going to perish. But the God of Israel, he is the one who made heaven and earth, and he is going to remain. So this is what is happening right now. Rebellion against Babylon, but God is using that rebellion and this occasion to give messages to the surrounding nations. And God is doing a work here by uprooting these nations and by allowing Babylon to destroy them and uprooting the people. God is going to loosen the hold of this national religion on them. And that will make these people more receptive and more open to hearing about the true God. And they are going to hear about him because if you read Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar himself sends messages to the whole kingdom saying that the God of Israel is true God. So while there is so much of evil and rebellion, God is simultaneously at work. Now let us read Jeremiah chapter 27, verse 12 and 13. Jeremiah 27, verse 12 and 13.
I gave the same message to Zedekiah, king of Judah. I said, bow your neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Serve him and his people, and you will live. Why will you and your people die by the sword, famine, and plague, which the Lord has threatened any nation that will not serve the king of Babylon?
Yeah, so Jeremiah reiterated it to Zedekiah, saying, don't rebel. What are you doing? You have to be subservient to Babylon, otherwise you will be destroyed. Now, one of the reasons why Zedekiah did not listen to Jeremiah was that there were false prophets who were preaching a false peace. They were saying that, the judgment of God is not going to fall, the king of Babylon is not going to come, he is going to go away, and things like that. So there was a false message of peace being preached, and Zedekiah preferred to listen to the false prophets. The same thing can happen today, isn't it? Sometimes the message of the gospel or the message of the word of God is not popular, or it's not what people want to hear. And so they will prefer to hear something that sounds positive, but is not necessarily true. So that is going on in Zedekiah's life. Now let us go once again to Ezekiel. Ezekiel chapter 17. Ezekiel chapter 17 and verses 12 to 14. Ezekiel chapter 17, verses 12 to 14.
Say to this rebellious people, do you not know what these things mean? Say to them, The king of Babylon went to Jerusalem and carried off her king and her nobles, bringing them back with him to Babylon. Then he took a member of the royal family and made a treaty with him, putting him under oath. He also carried away the leading men of the land.
Yes. So God is reminding the people of Israel through Ezekiel, this is the covenant that the king of Babylon made with Zedekiah. Okay, now read verse 15 and 16.
But the king rebelled against him by sending his envoys to Egypt to get horses and a large army. Will he succeed? Will he who does such things escape? Will he break the treaty and yet escape? As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, he shall die in Babylon, in the land of the king who put him on the throne, whose oath he despised and whose treaty he broke.
Yeah, I hope the picture is clear. That Pharaoh came, visited all these people. He won the hearts of Zedekiah and all that. Zedekiah took his faith, and Zedekiah became a ringleader in the rebellion. And now, far away in Babylon, God is telling the prophet Ezekiel, look at what this fellow is doing. He is violating the covenant that he made. Can such a person stand who is so unfaithful? Now, you might feel like asking, why did Zedekiah break this covenant? Probably he wanted better wealth by not paying tribute to Babylon, and he probably thought that he could get some help from Egypt, some maybe financial assistance to Egypt, perhaps bigger influence. Instead of being a vassal state of Babylon, probably he could get bigger influence. So these were the selfish, proud motives of Zedekiah, which inspired his rebellion. But God is extremely displeased with Zedekiah. Now let's come to Jeremiah. Jeremiah chapter 21. Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 1 and 2. Jeremiah chapter 21, verse 1 and 2.
The word came to Jeremiah from the Lord when King Zedekiah sent to him Pashhur, son of Malchijah, and the priest Zephaniah, son of Messiah. They said, inquire now of the Lord for us, because Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, is attacking us. Perhaps the Lord will perform wonders for us in times past, so that he will withdraw from us.
Yeah, how convenient, isn't it? So you have broken the covenant with this great emperor. You have infuriated him. Now he comes to attack you. You have not been listening to God's prophet. And now when the army of the Babylonian comes and surrounds the city of Jerusalem, now Zedekiah wants to call Jeremiah and said, can you please inquire of the Lord? You know, maybe he'll do something good for us. And even today, we all have this tendency to some extent. And there are people like that today, isn't it? God for them is just someone they go to when they are in trouble. The rest of the time, they will be disobeying him. But when they are in trouble or when they need something, they will come to God. And that's exactly what Zedekiah is doing. Nebuchadnezzar found out what was happening, and he was furious at Zedekiah. Then let us read verse 3 and 4.
But Jeremiah answered them, tell Zedekiah, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. I am about to turn against you the weapons of war that are in your hands, which you are using to fight the king of Babylon and the Babylonians who are outside the wall besieging you. And I will gather them inside this city.
Yeah. So the mighty Babylonians have arrived, but it seems like the people of Jerusalem, Zedekiah and his followers, they are trying to put up a tough fight. In these studies, I have many times referred to Josephus, the Jewish historian who lived in the 1st century. Now, if he is to be believed, these people did put on a great fight. The Babylonian army was large, but the Jewish people had the advantage of knowing the terrain. They also had the advantage of height because Jerusalem was at a high altitude. And if you remember, all these earlier kings, the ancestors of Zedekiah, they had all made a lot of fortifications in Jerusalem. Now these people are getting ready to put these things to the full use. So they intend to put a valiant fight against this mighty Babylonian army. Let us read verse 5.
I myself will fight against you with an outstretched hand and a mighty arm in furious anger and in great wrath.
Yeah. See, now people have their talents and skills. There are many rebellious, evil, wicked people who have their talents and skills. And when they face the consequences of their sin, they are willing to fight it out as best as they can. But such people realize that it is futile to fight against God. It is futile to fight against God. And we also should ask ourselves, is our course of action leading us to fight against God? Now, God is saying that, I myself will fight against you. So God is fighting on the side of the Babylonians. What a turn of events this is. Long back, God would fight for Israel against their enemies. But now God is fighting for Babylon against Israel. So when the Israelites try to put on a brave fight, they're actually striving against God. And we have to ask ourselves, because of our rebellion or because of our selfish pursuits, have we got ourselves into a situation where we are striving hard, but it's going to be a futile striving because we are striving against God? Let us read verse 6.
I will strike down those who live in the city, both man and beast, and they will die of a terrible plague.
Yeah, this did not require a miracle from God, because when many people are holed up inside a city with limited water supply, there will be a compromise in the sanitation, isn't it? And when there is improper sanitation because of limited water supply and lots of people crowding close by, disease is obviously going to break out. So these are some of the sufferings that the people of Jerusalem underwent. Let us read verse 8 and 9.
Furthermore, tell the people, this is what the Lord says. See, I am setting before you the way of life and the way of death. Whoever stays in the city will die by the sword, famine, or plague, but whoever goes out and surrenders to Babylon, to the Babylonians who are besieging you, will live. They will escape with their lives.
Yeah. Imagine what kind of message this is. Okay, just imagine, suppose the Chinese were attacking our country, and suppose we as believers were told by God to tell the people that, if you want to survive, you'll have to go on the Chinese side. That would definitely put our government against us. But that was the message that Jeremiah was asked to give the people, that if you want to survive, you will have to go out to the Babylonians. And for the people also, it's a very difficult decision to make, because if you try to go out to the Babylonians, what if the Jewish officials, the officials of Zedekiah, if they catch you, then they will accuse you of being traitors. You're going to the enemy's side. Okay, but this is what God says. So God is giving people these two very difficult options, but the situation has come to this because of the sins of the people. So you have this very difficult situation. Then let us go to Jeremiah chapter 37. Jeremiah chapter 37 verse 5. Jeremiah 37 verse 5.
Pharaoh's army had marched out of Egypt when the Babylonians who were besieging Jerusalem heard the report about them. They withdrew from Jerusalem.
Yeah, I told you that Pharaoh was the one who started this. Okay, now that Pharaoh died. The one who has come right now is his son. So this fellow is the grandson of the Pharaoh who killed Josiah. So he's come and he's now trying to help Zedekiah. But isn't it interesting? I mean, his grandfather is the one who has killed Zedekiah's father, but now he is coming to help Zedekiah. But that's how politics is, right? People change their allegiance. So now the Egyptians are coming to help the people of Judah. And when the Babylonians noticed it, the Babylonians got away from Jerusalem. Now, when this happened, it looked as if the message of the false prophets is right, because the false prophets must have had a great sigh of relief. Even Zedekiah had a great sigh of relief. So nice to see the army that came and besieged us, and we got so scared. But now our allies, the Egyptians, have come, and so the Babylonian army has gone away from us. Let us read verse 6 and 7. You're muted.
Sorry, the video got cracked. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, it's Jeremiah chapter 37, verse 6 and 7.
Then the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Tell the king of Judah, who sent you to inquire of me, Pharaoh's army, which has marched out to support you, will go back to its own land.
Yes.
Out to Egypt.
Yes. So here we see that as human beings, we can only see the present state of affairs. Everybody in Judah was rejoicing that, okay, the Egyptians came, and so because of that, the Babylonians have gone away from us. But God is the one who sees what is going to happen ahead, isn't it? So God tells Jeremiah to tell the king Zedekiah, listen, yes, Nebuchadnezzar's army has gone away, but that is only temporary. So the Egyptian army is not going to engage them for long. The Egyptian army is going to return back to Egypt, and the Babylonians are going to return. But Zedekiah was not much in the mood to listen to Jeremiah. He probably thought that the false prophets are right. He thought that, things are nice now. We are not going to have any trouble. Zedekiah was just heaving a sigh of relief. Now, as I said, Zedekiah was not a thoroughly evil person. I mean, he had a little sense of goodness in him. At that time in the land, there was a lot of oppression going on. And when Zedekiah saw that the army of the Babylonians has gone away, he thought that, okay, what a nice sigh of relief it is. Let us celebrate. Let us do something that will make us all feel a little better about ourselves. So he took a decision. Let us read chapter 34. Jeremiah chapter 34. Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 8 and 9.
The word came to Jeremiah the Lord after King Zedekiah had made a covenant with all the people in Jerusalem to proclaim freedom for the slaves. Everyone was to free their Hebrew slaves, both male and female. No one was to hold a fellow Hebrew in bondage.
Yeah. Now, this was actually the first law that God gave Moses when he went up on Mount Sinai. After the 10 Commandments, there's a long series of laws, and this is the first one, that after a Hebrew slave serves in his master's house for 6 years, in the 7th year, he is to be allowed to go free. And this was a command in the time of Moses, but the people of Israel never practiced it. In fact, those people who had the upper hand in society were oppressing the poorer people. So they had never practiced this. So Zedekiah, after all these years, he says, okay, let's do this. Let's release these slaves. And so they proclaim liberty to these slaves. But then if you read further in verse 10, it says that after some time, the officials said, no, we can't allow the slaves to go. And they called back all the slaves. How did they have that kind of power over the slaves? Probably they must have made a rule that, these freed slaves cannot seek new employment, or they cannot buy food, or they cannot avail of the rationing services that were going on in Jerusalem and Judah at that time. They cannot avail of any of these things unless they submit once again to their masters. So these people reversed the law that Zedekiah had, the decree of freedom that Zedekiah had made. So in verse 17, we see God's response. Yeah, Anjali, read verse 17. Jeremiah 34:17.
Therefore, this is what the Lord says. You have not obeyed me. You have not proclaimed freedom to your own people. So I now proclaim freedom for you, declares the Lord. Freedom to all, freedom to fall by the sword, plague, and famine. I will make you abhorrent to all the kingdoms of the earth.
Yeah. So you see that, these people of Judah are like this, that when God is bringing judgment upon them, and if there's any possibility that they can do something good and perhaps, avert the subsequent judgment, they just do the opposites. And they make God all the more angry and all the more wanting to judge and to punish them. These are all negative examples for us. People of the world may be like this, but are we like this? Are we stubborn in our rebellion? If God is chastising us, will we continue in our sin and make God more angry? That is what these people were doing. And all this under the nose of Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the one who proclaimed freedom for the captives. But when his officials said, no, the slaves have to come back, Zedekiah did not have the backbone to hold his ground. He was a spineless leader, a leader with a little bit of good intentions, but no convictions to stand for the word that he has said, to be faithful to the word that he proclaimed. And so God is going to bring judgment. In verse 21 and 22 of the same chapter, God is telling the people here that I'm going to bring back the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon has gone away from you, but he is going to return. So the Egyptians had diverted the Babylonians. But once again here in verse 21 and 22, God says the Babylonians are going to come back. And that's exactly what happened actually. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, he came out with his big army, but he wanted to avoid a full-scale confrontation with the Babylonians. So he did distract them a bit, but he avoided a full-blown conflict. He retreated with his army back to Egypt, and the Babylonians began focusing on Judah and Jerusalem once again. Let us read Jeremiah chapter 34 and verse 7. Jeremiah chapter 34, verse 7.
While the army of the king of Babylon was fighting against Jerusalem and the other cities of Judah that were still holding out, Lachish and Azekah, these were the only fortified cities left in Judah.
Yeah. When I'm making Anjali read a verse which is not a full sentence, you can understand that I'm trying to save time by not reading all the verse. This verse is not a full sentence, but it just says that something was going on when the king of Babylon's army was fighting against Jerusalem. And it mentions 3 cities. Now, the reason this verse is somewhat interesting is that there is one artifact, famous artifact that has survived from this time, and it's called the Lachish letters. The Lachish letters. If you remember, 3, 4, 5 generations ago, Lachish was destroyed by Sennacherib during the time of Hezekiah, and he took the people captive. But then as the decades passed, the city was repopulated, and again it had become a fortified city. So here we have Jerusalem, Lachish, and Azekah. And there's an artifact called the Lachish letters that has survived, and these are exchanges between an Israelite commander and his subordinate. And they're talking about the supplies that are being sent back and forth. And they're also talking about the signals that they see from a city. So since there are only 3 or 4 fortified cities that are remaining in Judah, what they used to do is in the night, they used to light a fire, and the fire and the smoke would go up from one city, and it would be from a mountain, and it would be visible from another city. And that's how the people of the other city would know that that city is still standing. Okay, remember, this is the time before we had phones and internet and all that. So this is how people used to communicate. So there is this letter in which this subordinate soldier is probably on a watchtower, and he is writing to his commander and he's saying, since yesterday, I'm not seeing the signal of Azekah. Since yesterday, I'm not seeing the signal, the fire signal of Azekah, which means that Azekah has fallen down. I mean, the Babylonians have taken over Azekah. They took over Azekah, they took over Lachish, and finally, they focused all their attention on Jerusalem. So when they came to Jerusalem, Zedekiah again got worried. Let us read chapter 37. Jeremiah chapter 37. Let us read verse 17, the first part of verse 17. Jeremiah 37, the first part of verse 17.
Then King Hezekiah sent for him and had him brought to the palace, where he asked him privately, is there any word from the Lord?
Yeah. You know, when we go to heaven, we need to ask Jeremiah, why did you put all these things in such a jumbled order? The book of Jeremiah is not written chronologically. So something that happened later is mentioned first. Like he just mentions at the start of the chapter that, this is what happened at this particular time. And then he says, and afterwards we will see something that happened before. So anyway, right now, this is the scene. Zedekiah again wants to talk to Jeremiah. We have noticed that whenever things get really bad and nasty, that's when Zedekiah sends for Jeremiah. So actually at this time, Jeremiah is in prison. They have put him in prison because they don't like the message that he is giving. So Jeremiah is in hardship actually, and Zedekiah calls him out and asks him, is there any word from the Lord? Because we are in big trouble. The Babylonians are back. Read the second part of verse 17.
Yes, Jeremiah replied, you will be delivered into the hands of the king of Babylon.
Yeah, so there's nothing new that Jeremiah has to say. So Jeremiah's message is that, Zedekiah, you are a fickle person. You keep changing your word, but God is not like that. God's word is fixed. Right from the beginning, this is what I'm telling you. And now also I'm telling you the same thing, that you are going to be delivered into the hand of the Babylonians. Read verse 19.
Where are your prophets who prophesied to you? The king of Babylon will not attack you or this land?
Yes. The false prophets were so confident earlier. There was one false prophet who broke the yoke that Jeremiah made, saying that, this is what God says, God is going to break this yoke of Babylon. Where are all those prophets now? They were rejoicing when the Egyptians came and the Babylonian army was diverted. But now the Egyptians are gone. The Babylonians are back. And now these false prophets have nothing to say. So Jeremiah is protesting because he's feeling very hurt that nobody believed him and everyone believed the false prophets. Now the false prophets are being proved wrong. So Jeremiah says, where are these false prophets now? See how they are discredited. Now let us read chapter 38, verse 17 and 18. Chapter 38, verse 17 and 18.
Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, this is what the Lord God Almighty, the God of Israel says. If you surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, your life will be spared and the city will not be burned down, and you and your family will live. But if you will not surrender to the officers of the king of Babylon, this city will be given into the hands of the Babylonians and they will burn it down. You yourself will not escape from them.
Yeah. We speak of God's sovereignty and human free will, isn't it? So there is a free will choice that is put before Zedekiah, but it's a very difficult choice. I mean, he has betrayed, he has been disloyal to the king of Babylon. How can he face him now? But God is telling him, you will have to go out and surrender to him. Only then you'll be able to survive. Otherwise, the city is going to be destroyed. But even now, Zedekiah hesitated. He did not want to go out and surrender to the very people whom he had been disloyal to. He wanted to hold out till the end. Let us read verse 19 and 20.
King Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, I am afraid of the Jews who have gone over to the Babylonians. The Babylonians may hand me over to them and they will mistreat me.
Yeah. Verse 20 also.
They will not hand you over, Jeremiah replied. Obey the Lord by doing what I tell you. Then it will go well with you and your life will be spared.
Yeah. See, the fear of man, is one of the biggest obstacles to obeying God. And Zedekiah had a good deal of the fear of man. And he had proven to be an incapable leader, an irresponsible leader. And his citizens knew that. And so now he's very scared. What about all the citizens who have already deserted to the Babylonians? How will they treat me if the Babylonians hand me over to them when I surrender to the Babylonians? But God tells him through Jeremiah that don't worry, I will protect you. God promises blessing to those who will obey him. They may be suffering, but still God promises blessing to those who obey him. But Zedekiah was just not willing to put his hands into God's hands, to put his life in God's hands. He could not, he just was unwilling to trust God on this. Read verse 21 and 22.
But if you refuse to surrender, this is what the Lord has revealed to me. All the women left in the palace of the king of Judah will be brought out to the officials of the king of Babylon. Those women will say to you, they misled you and overcame you. Those trusted friends of yours, your feet are sunk in the mud. Your friends have deserted you.
Yeah. So these women, that is his wives and his concubines or whoever else is there, his family members, all the female family members will now become either the servants or the concubines or the wives of the Babylonian aristocratic class now, because of this defeat that Zedekiah is going to have. And for the women, it's a change of environment and all that, but they are not going to experience violence. They will have to put up with a new family, perhaps a new husband, perhaps, but they are not going to be killed. They are not going to experience violence. But they will see Zedekiah as a loser. They will see Zedekiah as a person who was betrayed by his friends, who could not have friends who are loyal to him. So this was the pathetic condition in which Zedekiah found himself. But in all these things, Zedekiah, without a spine, was somehow holding out in Jerusalem. Let us go to 2 Kings now. 2 Kings chapter 25. 2 Kings 25 verses 2 and 3. 2 Kings 25 verses 2 and 3.
The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. By the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for the people to eat.
Yeah. So after the Egyptians left, it was around 18 months of siege. And after 18 months of siege, the people inside ran out of food. The food supplies ran out. They cannot do agriculture inside Jerusalem because so many people are crowded there. They ran out of food. This is around August in perhaps 587 BC. August 587 BC. The people have run out of food. There's nothing they can do now. Let us read verse 4 to 7.
Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled at night through the gate between the two walls near the king's garden. Though the Babylonians were surrounding the city, they fled toward the Arabah. But the Babylonian army pursued the king and overtook him in the plains of Jericho. All his soldiers were separated from him and scattered, and he was captured.
Yeah, verse 6 and 7 also.
he was taken to the king of Babylon at Riblah, where sentence was pronounced on him. They killed the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. Then they put out his eyes, bound him in bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon.
Yeah. So it seems that there were Jews who had fallen over to the Babylonians, and they informed the Babylonians the direction in which Zedekiah had fled. So the Babylonians sent a pursuing party, and as the Babylonian party approached, as the Babylonian soldiers approached Zedekiah, Josephus, the historian, tells us that all the soldiers who were with him, they just fled in different directions because they wanted to escape capture, right? When the enemy is coming so close, then every man fights for every man cares for his own skin, right? Not anybody else's skin. So all the soldiers left Zedekiah in different directions, and the Babylonians were focused on him only. And they all came, and in that way, Zedekiah was caught. Now, unlike David, we see that, if you compare, we know that David also had a lot of ups and downs. David was in situations where his life was in danger, he was being pursued, and so on. But David had loyal friends, people who would be with him, who are willing to take a spear for him, people who are willing to be with him till the very end. But Zedekiah did not have any loyal soldiers like that. As the Babylonian soldiers started catching up on him, his soldiers just galloped on their horses in different directions and left him. Now, why is that? Because Zedekiah was not a leader with principles. A leader without principles is unable to inspire a loyal following. If there is a leader who is godly, a leader who follows God, then all other godly people will be loyal to him. But Zedekiah was not that kind of person. And he had nobody. And the Babylonians captured him. And then they brought him to Riblah. And Josephus, the historian, says that at Riblah, he met Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar started berating him about the covenant that he broke. You broke this covenant. And you were not supposed to be the king. It is your nephew who was to be the king. He was the direct descendant. I removed your nephew from the kingship. I gave the kingship to you, which means I did such a big favor on you. Yet you were not loyal to me. You broke the covenant. And Josephus says that just before killing Zedekiah's children, Nebuchadnezzar said these words, that your God was displeased with what you did, the way you broke your covenant. And that is why your God has handed you over to me. What a contrast between Daniel and Zedekiah, isn't it? Back in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar was in touch with Daniel, and Daniel was pointing Nebuchadnezzar to the true God and making him realize that this is a true God. And on the other hand, Zedekiah is supposed to be the king of Israel, probably related to Daniel. And Nebuchadnezzar is actually taking the name of Jehovah and speaking to Zedekiah and rebuking him. So a person, supposedly a Christian, a Christian in the sense, a person who takes God's name, but he is rebuked by a man of the world with the name of his own God. Such is the pathetic testimony and life that Zedekiah lived. And he was blinded. So our topic was not the prophecy, but it's interesting that Jeremiah and Ezekiel, they all prophesied so many things about Zedekiah. And Josephus, the historian, says that the reason Zedekiah did not believe the prophecies is he thought that something is not matching. Because Jeremiah said that you're going to go to Babylon, and Ezekiel said that you are not going to see Babylon. So Zedekiah thought that there's a contradiction. But then both turned out to be true because Zedekiah was blinded before he was taken to Babylon. Spiritually looking at it, Zedekiah's physical blindness is a symbol of spiritual blindness, isn't it? And those people who are messed up with the world, who have no spine, no willingness to listen to God's word, no stand, no faithfulness, no loyalty, nothing, permanent spiritual blindness can result. The loss of everything and spiritual blindness will be the result of those people who consistently refuse to listen to the word of God. And then in the further verses of this chapter, it says that the king of Babylon sent his commanders and they razed the city of Jerusalem. They destroyed the buildings, the important people, they destroyed the temple as well. And when we see the temple of God being destroyed, we will feel bad that this is the place that God had put his name, and it was destroyed. But we saw the abominations that were going on in the temple. God cannot honor and own a place in which there is such impurity and wickedness. And so God enabled the Babylonians to destroy the whole land. So thus the kingdom of Judah was destroyed. So that concludes our study of the Kings and Chronicles, the kings of Israel and Judah. It was a story or an account in which there was almost consistently, there was rebellion against God. There were warnings of judgment, which largely went unheeded. And finally, it came to this, that the grand temple that Solomon built was destroyed. The city of Jerusalem was destroyed. And except the poorest people of the land, all the other citizens were either killed or taken as captives to Babylon. So we didn't come here to entertain ourselves. It's not a pleasant story. It's not a story with a happy ending, at this point at least. It's a sad story, but it is real. It is history, and it is a testimony of what are the consequences of the choices that we make. May God help us to take lessons from the life of not only Zedekiah, but all these kings and all these people who lived in such ancient times. Although they lived so long ago, the issues that they faced are similar to the issues that we face, and their choices and their consequences are relevant for us. May God bless these words for us.